Have you been engaging with a piece of media you see it and possesses many of the same themes? This is mostly an observation based on my experience consuming stories and spending time with communities in general. Over the course of decades, we have seen shonen gone and past. From the two manga that pioneered the tropes such as 8-Man Cyborg 009 to classic manga from the 60s that introduced these concepts with this genre. From evil organizations, antagonists turn to heroes, power-ups, the power of friendship, and so many other cliches you know and love. And you know what's the best thing about it? Both of these manga were inspired by superhero comics in the 60s and were establishing the premise of shonen going forward. We can look back and admire the creations of these past works. Over the couple of years, there have been a lot of modern shonen series that feel half-baked or rushed. I'm not saying any of them are bad, but there are problems like we shouldn't ignore. For example, in old shonens, the main complaints were things like, this is too slow, too long, too dragged out, never knowing where to end. The main fights and plot points were very spaced out with a lot of bluff and filler in between. Meanwhile, in a lot of other modern shonens, the main complaints are that the story is too fast, too rushed, too short, too much fighting, not enough downtime moments, not enough time to spend with the characters, not enough bonding. Considering that JJK is ending, and with the time that I am recording this video, all the hyper battle manga from Jump are shot full of flaws, the dynamics at play, the systematic issues mangaka face. Partially at Weekly Shonen Jump, it has not only been detrimental to only the stories, but the people who are telling them. Since then, I've been seeing other manga of lately having rushed endings, unsatisfying conclusions, or anticlimactic character arcs. One of my friends, Opa and Draco Nick, brought up a point where I will be using in my video. The current shonen series lacks a focus on characters and failing to explore them. There have been a recent amount of fights compared to the older generation. You have everyone fighting Sukuna in the final arc of JJK. They fought this dude for an entire year and didn't make any progress. Think about it. Imagine fighting one character for a year, pushing aside other characters, and sacrificing their screen time and development. Sukuna is pretty much a hater, but he and Yuji didn't interact enough. One of the best parts of pre-Kenjaku JJK was the scenes between Sukuna and Yuji. Sukuna laughing alongside Mahito due to Junpei's death, him cleaving Yuji inside of his domain, etc. He was a generally interesting villain. He was menacing and was used sparingly before the calling games. The major problem with Sukuna is that he overshadows the rest of the cast. Gojo got obliterated and didn't have a satisfying conclusion. Many fans didn't take this lightly, considering the story hasn't progressed much until Yuji joined the fight, which echoes a lot of the problems with modern shonen, from killing off characters we barely knew or developed. It's a combination of sloppy storytelling and ridiculous power creep. With the problem of having too many fights. Don't get me wrong, I love fights, but they should be sparingly used. Conflicts is about goals. One character wants the thing, another character wants something different. Conflicts is a battle of wills. There is always a question who is going to win, which makes for an intriguing scenario. It creates tension, suspense, and excitement as the audience gets to know the characters, because it reflects the character's struggles and the entire thesis of an arc. Great fights push the story forward in the same way the types of great scenes do. There are manga, even some shonen outside of Jump, that does a better job at writing compelling characters. since the older titles in different series did it in a span of a few episodes and chapters, while modern shonen refuses to take the time to let the characters grow and keep introducing fight after fight after fight after fight, which is getting tiring. Take a series like My Hero, for example. The pacing is so fast that it doesn't allow the characters to breathe or take time for each arc. So many of us had complained before the war about the pacing. The aftermath saw no downtime for the characters to mourn or react to what had transpired. We only saw Deku go solo class 1A and just fight people, seeing occasional development with new characters. The world of My Hero is big, but everything feels so incredibly small and lacking character interactions and time to know the cast. This isn't me saying MHA is bad, but it could have taken time to develop these events. Let me give you an example of this. The mutant discrimination subplot we see in the final arc is, to put kindly, undercooked. It's rather what little meaning it might have, though a lack of planning, as instead of having scenes setting it up, we're just left with flashbacks seconds away from their payoffs. We've never actually seen the process of mutant discrimination in the real story time before the war and before people's biggest fears came true and before the civilians started to be drawn in an exaggeration people are bad way and before the story started to draw bullet points after bullet points at us because of its rushed ending. Many anime fans will excuse this by saying Horikoshi's Japanese, so he doesn't understand what it's like to be discriminated against. Here's the problem with that. Horikoshi literally introduced racism and discrimination into these 5 chapters. It's a writer's job to understand the nuances and complexities of real-world issues. You have Soji trying to push the code of ethics of the state using violence against protesters and minorities, which is ignorant and naive messaging. The second problem is the lack of accountability referring to the nature of societal issues. As it stands, a lot of what's happening now feels like it amounts to someone saying racism is bad, and it's doing Soji a huge disfavor. You can't just drop a racism storyline and belittle the subject matter. Like, Soji literally screams, "You're gonna set us back 30 years!" At a racial uprising consisting of people who have the right to be angry and fed up with the system. Spinner isn't wrong when he says if heroes win, nothing will change. Yes, I know they are presented as bigoted and violent and misguided, but that's my problem. I fundamentally disagree with the framing Horikoshi choose to present this theme of bad violent writers who are actually racist against the majority, who are then quelled by the representatives of the state portrayed as the heroes. The whole "they have a point" stick about characters like these wanting to fight back against racism, but they are either written as vicious or wildly out of character. Nowadays, it feels like we get less inspired stories, leading to mediocre entertainment and messages that don't land the mark, leaving out crucial and important details due to the lack of understanding of these subjects. Those are too afraid to go into the harsh details and events to play it safe. Considering the older stories had time for characters to breathe and act like people outside of the conflict, allowing the audience to feel a connection to the character before and after, and only utilize conflicts to get the message across to the audience while treating the subject matter with respect. A good conflict can be compelling and dynamic, and can incorporate a variety of elements. My problem with modern shonen is that it heavily relies on too many conflicts instead of building up the relationship between the characters. Take Goku vs. Frieza from Dragon Ball. You have two opposite characters battling to prove something. Goku confronting his morality and Frieza proving he's invincible. It only lasts 20 chapters in the manga and 9 episodes in Kai. The thing about Goku vs. Frieza is that it was perfectly built up throughout the entire Namek saga, foreshadowing the Super Saiyan and having the Z Fighters contribute to the battle. This battle is not about good versus evil. In reality, it's Goku fighting his oppressor. Frieza was an oppressive force who took advantage of the victims and exploited them. Goku is the one who fights against this evil tyrant using the eternal hermit teachings from Master Roshi while bettering himself while not trying to be like Vegeta. Frieza lost because of his ego, and when he goes full power, he becomes the very thing he hated about the Saiyans, which led to his demise. Goku came from circumstances and misfortune and is the one to put an end to Frieza's rule. It's a message about one coming to terms regardless of your past. Never too late to want to be better and improve yourself. Because of its simplicity, Toriyama was able to tell a compelling story without complicating the plot. Many modern shonen, rather than learning from their predecessors, they lack a direction or poorly thought out concept that misses the mark. It just becomes more action, overall substance, and no more time to relax between arcs to further develop the characters. I want to talk about the final battle with Muzan, especially how it was disappointing. Tons of Demon Slayers are throwing themselves at Muzan like human sacrifices. Every character is stalling with the limited time they have. That sounds like an interesting fight on paper, but then it falls apart quickly. Biggest issue mainly comes from how repetitive Muzan whips are. Muzan has been built up as a total monster. For the leader of the demons, who is supposed to be the ultimate challenge and has many other abilities that were established, Muzan doesn't use any of his powers. He just resorts to using whips, and it felt so underwhelming. There was so much they could have done with the idea of his biological manipulation and Black Rose whips. My second problem is also him getting weaker. When it came to that stage of the fight, it really took me out because it felt like a miracle drug which constantly and randomly getting new systems. Oh yeah, it turns Muzan okay? Oh, and it also weakens him. Something isn't right. Oh wait, his own wounds from the Yorichi fight from hundreds of years ago reappeared despite this never being mentioned in prior chapters. It felt like some plot device for Gotoye to have the Slayers to take him out easily. We've never really saw or learned about said drug until now, and it felt like new developments were being pulled out of nowhere to conveniently and randomly weaken Muzan by giving each new symptom each and every chapter. It was a complete cop-out. You have built this character for hundreds of chapters, and instead of making him a force of nature, you have simply taken away his agency, effectively turning him into a joke. It felt like the author just had to get it out of the way when this was the big bad villain, the final villain. Many fans will excuse this as the characters using the tactics and how the fight represents the human will. The 4-stage drug used to make Muzan become human age and unable to divide himself into pieces to flee and destroy his cells. I get the mangaka wanted a way to fatally weaken Muzan to make the Demon Slayers able to finish them off, but the whole Tamio saves the day with these never-mentioned drugs plot seem forced and convenient. I also don't like how Open Eye effectively gets his backstory a few chapters before he dies. It makes the ending of the fight feel extremely rushed when you consider that some of these characters have only just gotten their backstories, so it ends up resulting in some characters coming incomplete and only dying to the fight itself. Let me give you an example of a couple of good fights from different series. Fairy Tail versus Hades. After Hades invites Team Natsu to his battleship, the heroes waste no time and give Hades all they got. Ursa requits and attacks. Natsu busts out his magic, along with Gray and Wendy supporting them and buffing them all. They all lay strike after strike, not giving Hades any room to breathe. After taking Fairy Tail's onslaught, Hades retaliates. He starts easily knocking them down, one by one. Losses exhausts Hades, but does not have enough energy left to finish the fight. Before he completely runs out, he releases all his magic energy to Natsu to continue the fight. Hades is using everything he's got. One more strike will end him, but the same goes for Fairy Tail. Natsu can't move, but he's the only one with the power of magic to fight back. As Hades unleashes dark magic at Fairy Tail, we'll see Wendy, Gray, Ursa evade the attacks while also carrying Natsu towards Hades. The next example is Dragon Ball. I will be using Goku and Piccolo versus Raditz. Goku and Piccolo, the greatest rivals and the most powerful fighters on Earth, are forced to team up to take down an alien member of a race. Seeing them work together is more exciting than who they are fighting against. I know we meme on Raditz, but he set the entire tone for Dragon Ball Z. We learned that Goku is an alien. There are others of his race. They are coming and they are ruthless. The reason why I bring up these fights in particular is because the characters work as a team to face a common threat, covering each other's weaknesses and figuring out how to counter and outwit the villains from their perspective series. While using their wisdom strategies to defeat the villains, the supporting characters also contributed enough to lead the protagonist to victory. It doesn't change the fact that the characters in Demon Slayer are so underdeveloped even after the big fight. I do not feel any attachment to any of the Hashira that are dying. The past 20 chapters feels like a fever dream, not gonna lie. What's worse is that the ending jumps 100 years into the future. Like, why should I care about the descendants? They have nothing to do with anything compared to the cast of characters. Even with the extra pages, it doesn't fix anything. As much as many fans hype up Demon Slayer for revolutionizing the shonen demographic, even though it didn't really do that with its characters or ending. Because with the recent endings we have gotten, it either ends with tragedy, with all the characters dying, unsatisfying conclusions to the story, or the manga being rushed, lacking that finality you get from an ending. It brings me to the next problem. The endings themselves. Many shonen fans either do a thick measuring contest to say this ending is better than another because themes, symbolism, and ideas. That sounds interesting on paper, but that doesn't make a good ending. What makes a good ending is that it lives up to the expectation, wrapping up loose ends, conclusions, character arcs, and ending the story that makes the journey satisfying. The ending is where you, the writer, makes your point as a conclusion in both senses. The end of a story and your statement as an artist. Endings aren't perfect by any means. It's one of the most difficult things to pull off. Most simply functional or obligatory serve to tie up loose ends without being meaningful, and some endings make everything that preceded seem pointless or a waste of time. Take my advice with the slightest grain of salt. I am going to pick a few endings to get my point across and show what I mean. Keep in mind, long-running series are almost never written with a definitive ending in mind, since authors can't predict when the story is going to end. Many people end up not liking the endings, leaving a sour taste in their mouths, not wanting to go back to these worlds or reread them. The ending of a story can affect how much you enjoy it, whether you want to experience it again. Take a bittersweet ending like Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood or Yu-Gi-Oh! Both series were concise and simple conclusions that felt satisfying. People go back to read these stories for the characters and how they're a part of the journey with the readers. Edward getting his body back was concise and understandable. Felt like a journey after all the struggles and chapters that we experienced with the characters. Seeing Edward reflect throughout his entire journey and finding happiness with Yu-Gi-Oh's ending is a good enough send-off where everything from the beginning of the story gets paid off. All the characters who the readers grew attached to and experienced their respective arcs gets to bask in the journey to the destination. Atem and Yugi have their final duel, and Yugi finally wins, thus meaning Atem can finally move on to the afterlife. The final duel is an emotional roller coaster that finishes Yugi and Atem's respective journeys. What endings are missing today is something that all of us can relate to. Concept of hope. Hope is vital to the writing of life because it what prevents us from becoming cynical and jaded. It's fundamental to becoming a different story. Hopeful stories can inspire people to face challenges, encourage, and achieve success. Despite the suffering, loss, and grief the characters experience, they resist against despair. Hope is not simplistic. It exists in the midst of real sorrow and doubt. It is not a claim to have all the answers, but a refusal to become warped and skeptical or to give into utter anguish. Many anime fans nowadays think hope and friendship is considered Disney level writing or call anything Mickey Mouse. Considering nowadays people are just miserable, they only enjoy the bleak look on life and stories that are dry or have poor messages. I'll never get why anime fans think that dark and edgy means more mature and better when that is kind of like a downer. It really disconnects you from that positivity. Shonen is currently treading the same path that superhero comic books did in the 90s. We had characters like Astro Boy and Joe Shimamura from Cyborg 009. Characters who were idealists at heart, who struggled with the burden of being a hero and the constant danger that comes with fighting against powerful enemies. These characters appeared after the end of World War II, and shonen manga from that bygone era tackle stories such as racism, identity, violence, bigotry, and anti-war at the start of the Cold War and Vietnam War. Both series influenced many shonen manga artists, including Akira Toriyama. I am hoping modern shonen just goes back to telling more hopeful and optimistic stories one day. But until then, I'll see you guys later. Also, guys, I'm going to be reading Ashita no Joe and Bastard for my next videos.